Oglesby was telling me that lesson 1 was just a front and back, just a real quick introduction, but you'll be doing lessons 1 and 2 next Sunday morning with Brother Don. And if you if you were to choose the upstairs classroom, they are doing minor characters in the Bible, and Greg Richardson is teaching that in the upper room. So if you wanted to do that class, you have that choice, or 2 Corinthians, and that will be the choices for Sunday morning. All right, so as we close out 1 Corinthians, as we draw this quarter to a close and looking at this final chapter, I'm glad that the Apostle Paul left this one to the last. When you think about the book of 1 Corinthians, of course, our mind immediately goes to what when it comes to the book of 1 Corinthians? Well, lay by and store in chapter 16, but I'm talking about the entirety of the book. When we think about 1 Corinthians, what are some immediate perceptions? What are some immediate thoughts that come to your mind?
Church had a lot of problems.
All right, church had a lot of problems. Church had a lot of problems, and that's really what the first 15 chapters is all about, is solving those problems. Here the apostle is writing to them, trying to help them. Now remember with me, and when you break apart the epistle, the first 6 chapters are really things that had been told to him by Chloe's people in chapter 1 and verse 10. And that carries us down through chapter 6, where we're dealing with the divisions amongst themselves, the preacheritis that they had amongst them. Chapter 5, the harboring of the sexual immoral. In chapter 6, the lawsuits, and then also sexual immorality with the temple prostitutes. But then beginning in chapter 7, we really look at the second half of the book of 1 Corinthians. And what do we know that he's answering in the second half, beginning in chapter 7? All right, questions that they've written to him. So in chapter 7, now about marriage. In chapters 8, 9, and 10, now concerning the things sacrificed to idols. In chapter 11, now concerning the role of women. Now concerning the Lord's Supper. Chapters 12, 13, and 14, now concerning spiritual gifts. In chapter 15, now concerning the resurrection from the dead. And really, each of those, Paul is trying to answer negative arguments. And really, he's having to kind of browbeat them in a couple of those places. But then when we come to chapter 16, and I think chapter 16 is the light at the end of the tunnel, because you think about the church of Corinth having multiple problems. They're dealing with difficulties. They're dealing with sexual immorality. They're dealing with things sacrificed to idols, the unbelief of the resurrection, or the belief in that there is no resurrection of the dead. All of those things, but yet we come to chapter 16, and what are they caring about in chapter 16, specifically those first 4 verses? They're caring for needy saints. And I don't know if you're as I am, but oftentimes I get into the book of 1 Corinthians and I just think about how bad these brothers and sisters in Christ were. But yet, even in all of the problems that existed, what are they able to see in 1 Corinthians chapter 16? Hey, Paul, we want to be a part of that contribution. And that, to me, speaks volumes about those brothers and sisters. That they're able to see through the fog, so to speak, of their own pride, their own selfish wisdom, all of the other things that they are definitely lacking. They're still seeking out an opportunity to help their brethren. And to me, that is to be commended for this congregation. All right, so looking at that first question, what is the purpose for this collection? All right. Why do we need to emphasize that phrase?
Today, the churches are using the money for everything.
All right. So,
the church is private.
Well, but I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's infected the church too. But this idea that the church has become the social welfare for the community that surrounds them. And that the church's treasury then is open to anyone and everyone who at least comes by on a random Saturday. I know that down in Orlando, when we were driving to South Mumby one day this past fall, they were having, I can't remember what exactly it was. I think it was a grocery drop-off. And this is right across the street from where Ken and Deidre live. And we're driving down, and the line of cars that were lined up to get these free groceries was over a mile long. Because, I mean, we literally drove by the entire line. And I'm not trying to justify or judge or anything, but understand what I'm saying. As I'm driving down this line of cars, guess what type of cars I'm driving past? If I'm lying, I'm dying. Multiple Cadillacs, multiple Mercedes, multiple vehicles that were, if not just as nicer than what even I am blessed to drive. And when I see those things, you know, what is our perception? That free can gain you a lot of attention, but at the end of the day, if you hot dog them in, you hamburger them out. I mean, that's just the old saying, but yet that's what we need to emphasize here in chapter 16. And when we emphasize that, we need to look at all of the occasions in which the contribution or some form of a treasury is used, who it goes for. And I'm going to do this very quickly because we don't have time to spend too much time here, but I want to emphasize this. Acts 2 and verses 44 and 45, it was given to all that believed. In Acts 4 and verses 32 through 35, it was to them that believed. In Acts 6 and verse 1, it was to the disciples. In Acts 11 and verse 29, it was relief unto the brethren. In Romans 15 and verses 25 and 26, it was unto the saints, or for the poor of the saints. In 1 Corinthians 16 and 1, it was the collection for the saints. In 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 1, it was a ministering to the saints. In 9 and verse 12, it was supplying the need of the saints. And in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 16, relieve them that are widows indeed, so that the church may not be burdened also. I mean, every time we have an example that is given to us in the New Testament concerning the church's treasury or concerning funds that are received between brethren, those funds were used for who? Saints. They were used for brethren. But then when we look at instructions that Paul gives to individuals in Galatians 6 and verse 10 specifically, who can individuals contribute to? You give to the saints, but also to all. And I think that the instructions there in Galatians 6 and verse 10 is to individuals, not to the congregation in total. All right.
The passage in Romans, I think it's real clear. But now I'm going to Jerusalem to serve the saints, for Macedonia and Achaia, and please make a contribution for the poor among the saints of Jerusalem. That's the only people that were supposed to receive this collection.
All right, and I'm glad Brother Mann went there, because that was my next verse that I wanted to go there, because Brother Mann, if you don't mind, because you're already there, would you read for us verses 26 and 27 of Romans 15?
For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make a contribution for the poor among the saints in Jerusalem. Yes, they were pleased to do so, and they are indebted to them. For if the Gentiles are shared in their spiritual things, then they are indebted to ministers to their also in material things.
All right, thank you, Brother Mann. So, and another reason I wanted those verses to be read, Romans 15, 25 through 27, exact cross-reference with the same contribution that's in the context of 1 Corinthians 16, the same contribution in the context of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. It's the same contribution. It's all being collected on the third missionary journey of Paul. But something is stated there in verses 26 and 27 that gives us an indication of why these brethren care so much for their brethren in Judea and Jerusalem. Why do they care so much for them in Jerusalem?
They sent the gospel to them, really.
All right, so where did the gospel begin? The Jews, and specifically in Jerusalem. And then that gospel has spread from that point onward. So here are these Gentiles in Corinth. Why do they care about anything about the Jewish Christians who now reside in Jerusalem? It's because they understand we are indebted to them. Because without the gospel being taught to them first and then now to us, we would be lost. So again, there's some special emphasis that we need to make there. Now, one quick... I did not mention that one. So, all right, so Romans 15 and verse 31 also. One other observation, and this is the instructions. When we look at chapter 16 and verse 1, the New American Standard says, as I have given, or as I directed the churches of Galatia. The ESV or the CSB says, as I have given instructions. But if you're reading the Old King James or the New King James, it says, as I give an order. When we read give an order, we see command. But when I see directions or instructions, it's not necessarily commands. So that's difficult at times, but this same word is used multiple times, and I want to give you those cross references, and I want you to read and study this out for your own selves, and I want you to realize the same words, given, order, instructions, directions, are used almost interchangeably in all of these different cross references. 1 Corinthians 7 in verse 17, and I so direct them, or so I direct in all of the churches, or I rule in all of the churches. I command in all the churches. I ordain in all the churches. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 14. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. The New King James, ESV, and the CSB says, so also as the Lord commanded those who proclaimed. And then 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 34, the remaining matters I will arrange when I come. There it is, I give directions, I give instructions, and then I will set in order the thing. So that word is kind of a blended term, but I do believe when we see it, the same instructions, the same directions, the same orders that Paul gave to the church in Corinth. What's the emphasis there at the end of chapter, or at the end of verse 1? He gave to who else? All the churches of Galatia. And if you go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 17, there Paul says a similar thought. It's not the same word, but he says, just as I teach everywhere and in every church. There the term or the verb is teach, where here it is a verb of command or order or set in order. All right, well, someone summarize for us Paul's instructions regarding this collection.
First day of the week.
All right, let's start there. I think that's a great place to start. First day of the week. When did Peter heal Dorcas? When was Peter, James, and the rest of the apostles arrested in Acts 4? Well, I mean, we don't really know, do we? A lot of these things, a lot of the times and a lot of the narratives and a lot of the historical accounts that happen in the book of Acts, we don't really know when that happened. When did Paul go into the Sabbath, the Sabbath day, Colby? That's when he went into the Sabbath. But you understand why I'm asking this question. Because so much of the New Testament happens just randomly, and we're not given any specificity of specific days. But yet in John chapter 20 and verse 1, on the first day of the week, the women went where? To the tomb. In Acts 2 and verse 1, on the day of Pentecost, which would have been on what day? on the first day of the week. The day of Pentecost was on a Sunday. It's 7 Sabbaths and 1. The day of Pentecost, the day 50 days after the Passover, on the day of Pentecost, on a Sunday. In Acts 20 and verse 7, what did the disciples do there in Acts 20 and verse 7? On the first day of the week, the disciples met. In Revelation chapter 1, John was caught up in the Spirit on what day? And on whose day? The Lord's day. What other day could be the Lord's day? So there's this special emphasis throughout the New Testament that is given to this specific day of the first day of the week. And when he says, I know again, in the New American Standard, it says on the first day of every week. If you're reading from the New King James, Old King James, it's probably just going to say on the first day of the week. Why does the New American Standard place that every week there? All right, every week has a first day, and it's a perpetual thing. I believe we can see in here a perpetual thing, at least in the sense of that when you assemble on the first day of the week, while you are assembled, this is what is to be done. These are some circumstances that are to be accomplished. Need, yes. Yes. If there is a need, there is a collection. If there is when you come together for the Lord's Supper, you come together to sing, to pray, to preach, all of those other things. Each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper. What is the expectation of God in the contribution? What? All right, give what you can. Any other ideas?
I think it's a first thought
All right.
rather than an afterthought.
All right, I think that's necessarily implied. Just as God would expect always to be the first in the Jew's heart, he's now expecting to be the first in our hearts, and we need to set that aside. What did Paul say in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 7? Do not give begrudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves what? A cheerful giver. Why is it so important that this collection, this offering, whatever this is, this contribution that is being made here, why was it so important that it be collected and be done with before Paul's arrival? All right, he has a mission to get it back to Jerusalem. But also think about this. If this is months leading up to his arrival, him coming ultimately, you can give at your speed, so to speak. But then if you've not fulfilled and Paul shows up, are you going to be a cheerful giver? More than likely not. What'd you say, Brother Frank? I'm going to blame that on Dustin. The camera's talking to me, Donald. Not the internet's camera, the security camera.
It might extend before we get the collection together, but Macedonia's already done it.
All right.
Maybe 6 months to a year later.
So Titus is there. Titus is going to be there. Titus is going to be sent, and he's going to be a part of the mission of bringing that collection. But what I was just thinking about is I'm looking down through the end of verse 2. Well, no collection. So that, if you're pressed on something, if you know something is coming up, what do you do in your own budgets? If you know in 6 months you've got something coming up, what do you do right now? You start saving, or you start chopping, you start putting it aside, you start chopping that down a little bit at a time, so that when that due date comes, April the 15th for a lot of us, when April the 15th comes, we can do what? We can pay the bill. We can pay the bill. And I think that's the instructions that's Paul given. Brother Man.
Yes, on the other side of the equation, they will use 2 Corinthians 9:13, where it says, while Felix, chairman of this ministry, they glorify God for you for past rejection of the gospel right, and for your distribution unto them and unto all men.
Mhm.
And they'll take that and say that all men means you can give anybody.
Yes.
But of course, it's italicized. It's not really, it should be all saints.
So hold on to those. Hold on to what Brother Mann's talking about. Hold on to that. And when Brother Don's preaching and teaching this class next quarter, I want you to fire that one at him, because I think that's an important point that needs to be made in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 13. Paul's not opening the collection, because if Paul says it 6 times this way and then one time it just appears possibly different, well, we probably need to do more investigation. And when we do that more investigation, we find out that it still should mean all saints. Why does Paul place so much emphasis in verses 3 and 4? What is he really? He wants the Corinthians to trust that the money's going to be what?
It'll be there when it's time to carry it.
All right, the money's going to be there, and that when we start moving from Corinth back to Jerusalem, Corinth sends who with Paul? All right, they send the money, and they send people to take it with them, so that the money is dealt with trustworthy. It's handled properly. It's handled honestly. There's no misgivings that ultimately, well, we gave Paul a lot of money, and when he got to Jerusalem, we don't know if he gave him all that money. And Paul's saying, I'm going to stay away from all appearance of evil. Taking precaution is what he says in 2 Corinthians 8 and verse 20. Taking precaution, for we have regard for what is honorable. Paul's abstaining from all appearances of that I'm going to take this money for my own selfish gain. That halfway to Jerusalem, I say, we've run into some thick, some thin times, and I really needed to pilfer that money box a little bit. That's not who Paul is, and Paul's staying away from that entirely by the Corinthians sending. Yes. Yeah. You think about a large group. This isn't just Paul traveling by himself. There's a large group. And if you look at Acts chapter 20, there's multiple individuals named there in Acts chapter 20, the first 7 verses, or so first couple of verses that really pays emphasis to this. Was a large group traveling. Somebody over here. Yes. Yes.
I was going to say, you wouldn't find anybody more trustworthy than Paul, but if he put that caveat in place, I'm going to make sure that people know that I'm doing it like it's supposed to be.
Yes, yes. And somebody over here, Brother May?
Some of these people in Acts 20. And he was accompanied by Sopater, Berea, son of Prom, Aristarchus, Secundus of Thessalonica, Gaius of Derbe, Timothy and Titus, Trophimus of Asia. They went